we want to come back to the topic of ki, as you had started your career, there was a fascist government, which
Yeah.
was basically, that the government controls the narrative. And that's kind of what's also happening today. So the world has come full circle. So us time te, jab ਏਦਾਂ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ ਸੀਗਾ, what was journalism like? What was being printed? What was allowed? What was not allowed? What was it like being in that stifled environment?
You see, that's a very, very good question. When I started 75, there was emergency in the country. So I was wondering whether is it the right or opportune time for me to join journalism. I don't know for how long this will continue, how long media will continue to be gagged. But I thought still there has to be some opposition, and as a true journalist, we have to fight for the right of freedom of expression, because this is a right which is enshrined in our constitution. So this is one of the freedoms which is very, very important to human dignity. Everybody wants to at least you can speak out, you can express yourself at home, in public, in school, in college, in marketplace, everywhere. If your opinion or your voice is gagged, then you are nothing but an animal who is told, commanded, follow this, go this. So that's not what it is to be in a democracy. So when we started, but though emergency ended in 77 and before I became a staffer, and but then the events in Punjab were such that this control on media continued for a while. I still remember in 84, when you were born. You remember, I have told you the story. I had gone to Ludhiana and your mom was expecting you. You came on 31st of May. And when I came back to Chandigarh after your birth, so there was a deputy commissioner of Chandigarh, Mr. Raghuveer Singh. He says, "Haan, Prabhjot, what is the good news?" So I told him, "Sir, I'm blessed with a son." "Oh, so curfew Singh has come." I said, "Why you say that?" He says, "I have been looking for you. I am to tell you from tomorrow there'll be curfew in the city because army is already gone in Amritsar, and so Chandigarh will also be under curfew. So your son has brought curfew with him." So he's always, whenever he talks about you, he'll always ask you, "How is curfew Singh?" So then curfew started. And for so many days, army was deployed in Punjab after Operation Blue Star, June 84. So I said, after 77, now again we have even 82 Asian Games. Before Asian Games, there were restrictions started and incidents were getting highlighted in media, like governments were taking actions against Sikhs in general and suspecting them to be supporters of Bindranwale's agitation and things like this, harassment, suspicion, everything like as it could happen, and all those worst things which you never anticipated in independent and a democracy which were happening. But anyway, so after Operation Blue Star, there was curfew for some days, and then 6 months later, when Indira Gandhi was assassinated, then was again curfew. And also with curfew came the censorship. That was the first time I, in my lifetime, experienced censorship. The day Indira Gandhi was assassinated, 31st October 1984, we had a meeting at Mr. Bhatia's place in the morning. So he wanted us to fan out in the city and look for stories. And then I went to Maloya, the village of Byan Singh, the main principal assassin of Indira Gandhi. So in the evening, when we were back in office with our stories and everything, we brought out a one-page pull-out that day, special edition, announcing the assassination of Indira Gandhi. One side was English and on the back side was Punjabi and Hindi. So in the evening when we were back in office, Government of India announced, Punjab government, Chandigarh administration announced censorship. Okay, no news story carrying anything in about arson, violence will be allowed to be published. So they, because violence had erupted in Delhi, so they thought there'll be reaction in Punjab. So they wanted to control Punjab so that Sikhs were majority in Punjab. Otherwise, they were targeted elsewhere in India, Delhi, Kanpur, other places. They were attacked, but they wanted at least Sikhs in Punjab should not get into violent mode. So they put censorship, and also curfew was there. So when Mr. Bhatia came to newsroom in the evening, I still remember. So he asked our news editor at that time, Mr. J.N. Bhamru. He says, Mr. Bhamru, how is progress? He said, sir, I can't bring out the edition. He said, what? What happened? So he said, sir, they are censors and they are uh, not allowing any story. They're not clearing any story. Even the statement Rajiv Gandhi made in an address to the nation after taking over as prime minister, they have censored the entire story. Wherever he spoke of arson or violence, they have cut those lines. So what should I do? That's my lead story. I have no lead story. He says, who is doing that? He said, these are the guys, 4-5 guys from Press Information Bureau, Field Publicity, and some government college lecturers and public relation people, they are here. He said, okay, let me talk to the chief commissioner. So from the newsroom, we dialed the number of Chief Commissioner, Mr. K. Banerjee, and he came on the line and said, yes, Mr. Bhatia, how come you? He says, you want me to shut down the Tribune? He said, no, Mr. Bhatia, what are you talking? Tribune is such a respectable paper. He said, no, your people, they are not clearing any item. They have even censored the Prime Minister's address to the nation. They say this contains these words. So what should I do? What should I put in place of that story? He said, no, that they can't censor Prime Minister's address to the nation. He said, this is what they have done. So he said, let me talk to them. He talked to them and he said, told them, behave properly, and or you can censor Prime Minister's statement. So Mr. Bhatia was very particular. He says, whichever story they censor, we leave that space blank. Whether it's on page 1, page 3, back page, wherever the story is going, and if they censor it, say censored and leave that space blank. So we started that. And that was another phase when the government came so heavily on media. And since Punjab was a turbulent state, Punjab was facing terrorism, and that violence continued till 93. So the government control throughout from 1979 till 93, especially 84 onwards, was so much the government would dictate, don't carry this story, don't carry this story, and violence, the terrorist violence story would come from agencies. You have to take only from agencies, not from your own correspondents. So there are lots of things were said, and some managements followed them, some managements defied them. So Tribune toward the middle line. We used our professional discretion. So whatever we thought is in public interest and is not provocative, not provoking people, so we would use those stories even if the government didn't want it. Like, for example, some statements made by terrorist organizations or militants, we would carry them. And sometime even the militants would force us to carry the full statements. And one day we carried a full page. I was away attending a war correspondent course, and in my absence, what happened was they came with a full page statement, and it was carried. And everybody was shocked. How come Tribune has come to their pressure tactics? But then the argument given by, because on that day there was an officiating editor, main editor was not there. So argument was that everybody has a right to give their point of view. So even every day we carry government's view, if one day they wanted their viewpoint to be published, though under threat, we published it. But then how we can put the safety of entire staff to threat, how we can endanger them. So maybe once in a while it happens, and it has happened. We carried. But so for that period was like not only governments, but extra constitutional forces, militant organizations also, they would at time they were threatening us, and we were bowing, bending, rather crawling to their demands and publishing their versions. Though what government was saying was also not true. It was more of a propaganda. So that's why when after this turbulence was over, Mr. V.N. Narayanan wrote a book, Trust with Terrorism. He mentioned okay, whatever newspapers published between 1979 and 93, it was not professionally done work. It was not news, but it was more of a propaganda, either of the government or of the militants. So nobody can find out the reality by reading those reports. Okay, what was actually happening in Punjab? So it was either this way, colored this way, or it was colored other way. So that was a phase where journalists, when they were asked to bend, they crawled. And though some journalists, they were very they lived to the values of the profession, and they didn't compromise, and they were ready to face threats. They were even threatened, and they faced police cases. They faced cases from the government and also threats from the terrorists, but they followed a professional line. So that's why some journalists, they were like those days, they were on the hit list of both terrorists and the government. But because of their professional uprightness, they survived. So that's a time when the Tribune also had only few journalists who stood by professional ethics and carried out whatever was professionally required of them. And some were even absent, and they were not present because they were under threat. But then there were other was working around the clock under threat, and they never knew whether they would return home the same evening after finishing their job during the day. So the government is never like so like generous to allow you to work professionally. So governments always, whichever government is there, will always try to gag and pressurize media. And now it's much more open. And it was, though those were very trying circumstances, but government pressure was not visible those days. Some media would stand up and say, no, this is wrong. We won't do this. But now I think the media, most of the media, as I said, Godi media, is not bending but crawling. That's why credibility has come low, and people have stopped believing, or they're just moving away from traditional and conventional media. They're saying whatever they are saying is more of a propaganda than projecting or giving us the reality or the correct news. So that was a phase where like from 75 till 93 was a very, very difficult phase, especially for journalism in Punjab and North, Chandigarh, Punjab, and Haryana. Rest of India was fairly okay, but Punjab was always under different laws. Governments were trying to stifle media, militants were trying to stifle media, and others are also like some people then on the lines of religion. So they were identifying journalists with religion, their ethnicity, their background, and they would view other journalists from other community with suspicion. So that was a very bad phase. But thank God it's over. And journalism was back on its reels. But those journalists who were true professional journalists, they survived and they never feared anything because they know ultimate, and everybody has to go. But if you live professionally, you will be remembered for your work. So that's what made the distinction.
And like that was till 1993, and today is 2023. So in 30 years,
Yeah,
it's kind of feels full circle, because the government and these big corporate organizations, they try to control social media, and they have been caught. ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਫੜ ਲਿਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ, ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਟਵਿੱਟਰ ਦਾ ਚੱਕਰ ਪਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ ਬਈ FBI was controlling ਕਿ ਵੀ ਹੁਣ ਵੈਕਸੀਨਸ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਕਿੰਨੇ ਪੰਗੇ ਹੋਏ ਸੀਗੇ।
yeah.